To be discussed this morning. My first guest this morning is Nawaf Al-Thani. He's a foreign affairs and defense analyst who previously served as Qatar's defense attaché to the United States and is joining us now from Doha. Good morning, Mr. Al-Thani.
Good morning, Matt.
It's good to speak to you again. There's been a lot of attention on Qatar because of its extraordinary role in negotiating this hostage release and indeed previous hostage releases. Let me ask you this, first of all. There have been several reports that this particular deal was actually already in the pipeline and ready to go about a month ago, just before Israel launched its land invasion, and was then delayed by the Israeli government. Have you heard similar reports? Can you confirm whether they're true or not?
Well, I can't confirm, obviously, but I have heard those similar reports. It definitely, as they say, tracks to what has been going on. Qatar has always been, at least its foreign ministry, which has primacy in negotiations, in the past have always been first to contact and offer to help. And it seems that was the case this time. Unfortunately, as we've seen even in recent statements by the Israelis, there is a reluctance to end this war and to head over to peace, unfortunately.
So it's possible, but you can't confirm that a month ago, when the first package deal, if you like, of releases was, ready on the table, as it were, the Israelis may have decided to continue fighting because that's what was required militarily by them at the time.
Well, again, not being in the government, I can't confirm that, but it does seem logical. And what I've seen in research and reportings points to that. Again, it tracks to what previous attempts by the Qataris have been in the past.
Just explain to us, in theoretical terms, how incredibly complex it is to have any hostage negotiation, but especially one that's in the middle of a hot war.
Well, the Qataris have done this in the past before to great success. This is quite different. As you've said, Matt, it's happening while bombs are falling on Gaza during a hot war, as you've said. This made it, and the Qataris have been very clear, a bumpy road, at times where things seemed to be going awry, but then came back into focus. And thankfully, at the end, we are here where we are today. Unfortunately, it's not exactly, I believe, where everyone wants to be. But then, nonetheless, this is what the Qataris have to be dealing with their partners, the Egyptians and the Americans, and the negotiating parties, obviously the Israelis and Hamas on the ground. The Qataris want this to continue beyond the 4 days to another 4 days. As you've said in many reportings, that the Israelis want to make it a day by day after the initial period for 10 hostages, which would be a much more difficult process. But unfortunately,
why would it be more difficult?
Well, agreeing to a fixed 4-day term is something that you can manage. And we've seen, at least in the second day, that it is more manageable to have a group of days together where you can manage humanitarian relief, logistics. Trucks don't move just, on a 24-hour notice, unfortunately. Prisoner swaps and detainee swaps are much difficult on a 24 hours or less notice. Having a 4-day period followed by another 4-day period would be optimal. Hopefully the Israelis will come around at the end of this 4-day period. We're not there yet, unfortunately.
I mean, one can imagine all sorts of pressures building up of new realities being created. I mean, for the hostage families in Israel, for instance, the idea that the fighting just resumes on Monday evening with no prospect of a further release, having seen all these other hostages released, will be incredibly painful, one would have thought.
Absolutely. I mean, just looking at the results right now, we're talking about by the end of today, the hostage negotiation would have brought about, and hopefully will by the end of today, 31 Israeli hostages released. 42 counting the 11 Thai workers that were, added very late yesterday in negotiations between the Qataris, the Thais, and the Egyptians. And that's a good number, and you want to see that continue, and you don't want to hold that negotiation in itself hostage to, military procedure that the IDF may want to continue. That seems counterproductive. Unfortunately, this is what the negotiators have to be dealing with right now, juggling many balls at the same time. Having the operations center set up at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I think, is a clever thing. It deconflicts things in real time, and they're continuing to do so. But Matt, if you allow me, there's also another point where the Qataris are doing, I think, something out of the ordinary. There's a team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs led by Minister of State Lulu Al-Khater. She has dealt with in the past with humanitarian issues, whom they're arriving in southern Gaza within a couple of hours to deal with the humanitarian support side with the ICRC and other humanitarian organizations. Now, doing both at the same time, having negotiating teams and having humanitarian teams from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar is a tall order, but I think that they're doing a good job, and the Israelis could help by being more flexible, I think, in achieving this. In the end, this only benefits their own citizens in addition to the Palestinian civilians.
Okay. And so it's all about process at the moment, isn't it? Setting up the kind of the pipelines, as you were, to make this a more regular process.
Absolutely. And hopefully this process will, as it has in the past 24 hours rather, bear more fruit and more success.
So there's a lot of discussion in the UK and elsewhere about the fact that Qatar is home to many Hamas officials, to the senior political leadership of Hamas. Are you, as Qataris, happy to have Hamas, residing in your state, living amongst you, and conducting their political affairs?
Well, actually, that's a misconception. There is a political office in Qatar that was, established after coordination and by request by our allies, the Americans. Obviously, the Americans, seeing that having a stability in Gaza for the past decade, the Qataris have been doing this, hosting the office and negotiating, would benefit Israeli security, as it has, at least until, the current situation. So it's not about liking or wanting, it's seeing what's effective. And I think the Qataris have been effective in this situation, in this negotiation, as they have been in the past. So effectiveness drives the national need to have these communication, and it's not about wanting or liking, actually.
And what's in it for Qatar to be in this negotiating role between Hamas and Israel?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, Qatar being in the Middle East obviously has a national interest and a personal interest in seeing peace and stability. We're not thousands of miles away. We're in the thick of it. So that's one thing. The other thing is using the ability and agility of Qatar and having successfully conducted negotiation for the good parts of the past 2 decades, whether it's returning children from Russia to Ukraine or negotiating with the prisoner swap in Iran and Afghanistan, obviously, before that, utilizing that niche capability and successful results that Qatar has to achieve that peace. Both those aims, I think, were the driving force, for Qatar to conduct this operation and negotiation.
And as you say, Mr. Al-Thani, Qatar's had a long role as a hostage negotiator in a number of crises, including, I believe, in Venezuela, astonishingly, because it's quite far away. And of course, all this is now the focus. That is the focus of Qatar's image. What no one is talking about is, the alleged human rights abuses that everyone was talking about before the World Cup. So your journey has also been quite a long one in terms of image, hasn't it?
Well, it has been. I mean, it's not a surprise to see that the over exaggeration of the humanitarian issues and human rights issues prior to the World Cup was blown out of proportion. Yes, Qatar admitted that we had some humanitarian worker issues that we resolved with the international community to great success and praise from them. It pales in comparison to some shortcomings from other countries, but Qatar was, owned those, resolved those, and moved forward. And that's important. Once you resolve those issues and move forward, that shows seriousness. That shows the ability to actually have results and not just talk, but actually walk the walk as well.
Sure. I mean, resolving and moving forward is what everyone wants for the situation in Gaza. Just a couple of more questions, if I may.
Absolutely.
I mean, as you've got almost 2 million Gazans now squeezed, jammed into the southern portion of the Gaza Strip, there will inevitably be more pressure on some of those to be housed in other countries as refugees. Do you think it's ever possible for Qatar to say to the Palestinian Authority, or indeed to the Israelis or to anyone, we are prepared to take some of these people? And if you're not prepared to, because you're in a very small state, do you think others in the region should be?
I think this goes back to a fundamental question of self-determination. The Palestinians should have the right to determine their future and not to be dictated to and say, well, go over here or go over there. And I think that's their home. They should have the right to self-determine their future. Now, on a humanitarian side, obviously having 2.4 million or 2.3 million in a small area is a problem. That's why Minister Lulua, she's going down there today with her team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to assess and support. But in the end, self-determination for the Palestinians should be the end state of everyone who believes in the long-term viability of peace in the Middle East.
And do you think, finally, that we are any closer to this after the dreadful events of October the 7th, where the last, 24 hours have been the only glimmer of rather dim light so far?
Well, unfortunately, the past 50 days of death and destruction have been very painful for everyone. Obviously, more so on the people that live there, and the Palestinians have, bear the brunt of all that. Unfortunately, talking about a lasting peace, that we are hopeful. The Qataris have mentioned that they're hopeful that this truce will lend to, an idea of peace. But right now, everyone's focused on the truce at hand and expanding that, moving forward, bringing in more aid. The amount of aid going in there is just a drop in the bucket. It's not even close to what the Palestinians need in Gaza. I think that's the way forward. Eventually, hopefully more peace and stability, but I think right now it's focusing on the mission at hand.
And if the fighting resumes on Monday, how depressing is that?
Well, for me personally, it would be extremely depressing because we're going backwards. And, that's for the Israelis and the Israeli citizens to deal with their unfortunate new conservative view in their government right now to just more war. But I don't think anyone stomachs a forever war in the Middle East, neither people in the Middle East or in Britain or beyond. Yeah. No one wants another forever war.
I certainly hope so. Nawaf Al-Thani, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. The question to you is, if you don't stomach that forever war, and I'm sure most of you really do not, what should be done to make this ceasefire, this short ceasefire, this pause in the fighting that's supposed to expire on Monday?